Not this table, Vivian. Marcus Reed said it under his breath, the way a man speaks when he wants a warning to sound like a suggestion. But the billionaire had already stopped walking. She was standing in front of the poorest table in the diner, and nothing Marcus said was going to move her from it. Outside, a Maine snowstorm pressed its white hands flat against the windows of Holloway's Corner Diner, rattling the old glass in its frame with every gust off the bay. Inside, forks paused halfway to mouths. Coffee cups hung suspended in the air. Above the pie case, a small television replayed the evening news, and beneath the anchor's voice ran a headline that had been circling all day. Billionaire philanthropist arrives in Birchwood Falls for tonight's charity gala. Vivian Cross stood in the doorway, in a long camel coat gone dark at the shoulders with melted snow. Her hair had come loose from its clip somewhere between the car and the door, and her eyes carried a tiredness that no amount of money had ever quite managed to buy off. At the last booth, under a lamp that flickered every few seconds like it was thinking about giving out entirely, sat Nathan Cole and his 9-year-old daughter Ruby, sharing a single plate of pancakes cut into careful, equal pieces. Nathan's jacket was frayed at both cuffs. Ruby's mittens didn't match. One plain gray, one with a snowman stitched crooked onto the palm. Between them sat 2 glasses of water and a small dish of syrup, rationed like everything else in their life had to be rationed. Vivian looked at the empty seat across from them, then at Nathan, and asked, quietly enough that it felt like a private question even in a room full of people listening. "Would you mind if I sat with you?" The whole diner seemed to hold its breath at once. Marcus stepped in closer, dropping his voice as if warmth itself were a public relations risk. "Vivian, there's a private room in back. The press is right outside. This isn't the image we planned for tonight." Nathan looked up slowly. He didn't recognize wealth when he saw it. He didn't register the net worth, the security detail waiting by the cars outside, the name people said with a kind of reverence usually reserved for weather systems or acts of God. He saw a woman standing alone in wet shoes, working hard not to look as lonely as she clearly felt. "It's just a chair," he said. Ruby didn't wait for anyone's permission. She slid out of the booth on her knees and pulled the seat open with both hands, like she was unwrapping something. "You can sit here. My mom used to say lonely people should never eat by themselves." For one unguarded second, the famous woman who had testified in front of senators, addressed stadiums full of investors, and built an empire out of nothing but stubbornness and a good idea, looked like a child had just pressed a thumb straight into an old bruise. She sat down carefully, as if the cracked red vinyl of that booth deserved more caution than the velvet chairs waiting for her 20 minutes away. Behind the counter, the waitress, a woman named Dolores Finch who had worked that same stretch of linoleum for 19 years, stopped wiping a coffee ring she'd been circling for the better part of 10 minutes. A trucker near the door leaned back in his seat. 2 teenagers in the corner booth stopped whispering to each other entirely. Even the grill seemed to quiet down, the soft hiss of butter fading beneath the weight of something nobody in the room could quite name yet. Nathan slid the little dish of syrup an inch closer to Vivian. "We only ordered the 1 plate, he said, calm and entirely unembarrassed by the fact. "But there's enough, if nobody minds smaller bites." Marcus gave a short, humorless laugh. "Sir, do you have any idea who you're speaking to?" Nathan took a breath, then reached over and gave Ruby the larger half of what remained. "A hungry person," he said. "That's usually all the information I need. Before we keep going, drop where you're watching from in the comments below, and if you believe people deserve to be seen before they're judged, go ahead and hit that subscribe button." Now, back to the diner. Because nobody in that room had any idea that the woman they'd just watched get quietly humiliated was Vivian Cross. The same Vivian Cross whose foundation had paid for half the scholarships in that county. Vivian reached for the fork Nathan slid toward her, but before she could take a bite, the ache in her chest pulled her attention somewhere else entirely. Backward, 22 years, to a version of herself who had never once imagined she'd end up here. She had come to Birchwood Falls looking for someone. Not a donor, not a business partner, not a face for a campaign. A stranger who had once signed 2 initials at the bottom of a receipt and changed the entire shape of her life without ever asking for anything in return. Her hands, the same hands that had signed contracts worth more than this town's annual budget without a tremor, tightened slightly around the coffee mug. She had spent years being admired in rooms full of chandeliers. She had never once, until this moment, been offered half of somebody's last pancake. Before the fork reached her mouth, The bell above the diner door rang again, and a gust of wind slid through the room like an opinion nobody had asked for. Nathan rose without any drama at all, crossed to the door, and pushed it shut with his shoulder against the wind. Outside, an elderly man was struggling to pull his coat tighter, his boots sinking into the gray slush collecting at the curb. Nathan looked at him for a moment, then glanced at the nearly empty tip jar sitting by the register. He didn't sigh. He didn't make an announcement. He simply pulled the last $5 bill from his own pocket, folded it once, and pressed it into Dolores's hand. "Bowl of soup for Mr. Harmon," he said quietly. "Put it on my tab, Dolores." She looked at him with the particular, tired sadness of someone who had watched this exact thing happen more times than she could count. "Nathan, you already worked a double today." "Then I've already earned enough to share," he said, like that settled it, because for him it did. Ruby watched from the booth, chin propped on both hands, looking proud and worried in the same breath. The specific expression of a child who knows her father is good, and also knows that goodness doesn't always cover the electric bill. Vivian caught that look and understood it completely, because she had worn it herself once, a long time ago, in a much colder building than this one. Nathan came back to the table, brushed a little snow off one sleeve, and sat down as though nothing at all had happened. Marcus studied him with narrowed eyes. "You make a habit of feeding strangers. Only when they're hungry," Nathan said, spooning a little more syrup onto Ruby's side of the plate. "That's not a financial plan." Nathan's smile was faint but entirely unbothered. "No, it's just a human one." The words settled over the booth with a quiet kind of weight. The lamp above them flickered again, catching the fine lines near Nathan's eyes, an old grill burn on his wrist, and the plain gold band he still wore on a chain beneath his shirt. Because some promises don't leave a person just because the one who made them did. He'd lived in Birchwood Falls long enough that people thought they had him figured out. They knew he drove a rust-fendered blue pickup that stalled in cold weather. They knew he rented the small apartment above the laundromat on Elm Street. They knew he packed Ruby's lunch in brown paper bags and walked her to school on the mornings the truck wouldn't start. What they didn't know was that every month, without fail, even in the leanest stretches, Nathan mailed a small envelope to a scholarship fund that had changed its name 3 times in the past decade. Some months it held $40, some months $12. One winter, after Ruby came down with the flu and the heating bill ran high, it held exactly 4 crumpled $1 bills and a note that read, "For someone who needs tomorrow." He never signed his full name. Just 2 initials, N.C. Ruby, had asked him once why they helped children they would never meet. It had been a cold night in late October, frost silvering the laundromat windows below, and Nathan had been counting quarters at the kitchen table by lamplight. Because your mother believed one kid, helped at exactly the right moment, could grow up and become somebody else's miracle, he'd told her. Ruby had considered this seriously, the way she considered most things, and then pushed 3 coins from her own piggy bank across the table toward him. "Then send these too," she'd whispered. "Maybe somebody needs a little miracle this month." Now, sitting across from Vivian Cross, that same child tore a corner off her paper napkin, folded it twice, and set a small paper heart down beside Vivian's coffee cup. Vivian stared at it like it was something rare and expensive, something no boardroom, no gala, no acceptance speech had ever managed to hand her. "Your daughter is very kind," she said. Nathan looked at Ruby, and the tiredness in his face softened into something closer to grace. "She had a good teacher. Her mother?" He nodded once. "And life teaches you plenty, if you let it make you tender instead of hard." Marcus shifted impatiently, glancing at his phone, already calculating what this small, strange dinner might cost Vivian's carefully built image. But Vivian had stopped listening to him. She was watching Nathan lift his water glass and quietly slide the last bite of pancake onto Ruby's side of the plate. Dignity not as something a man announces, but as something he practices even when he assumes no one important is watching. Vivian held the little paper heart between 2 fingers, and for a moment the diner seemed to dissolve around its fragile edges. The voices at the counter blurred into background noise. The storm pressed harder against the glass. Somewhere behind her, the television kept replaying clips from her foundation. Her speeches, her photographs beside governors and schoolchildren, her name in bold white letters. But the woman sitting in that booth didn't feel like the woman on the screen. She felt 12 years old again, sitting beneath a cracked church basement window in upstate New York, pretending she could still read the chalkboard while the letters slowly blurred and disappeared in front of her. Back then, her name hadn't opened any doors at all. Back then, Vivian Cross had owned exactly 2 sweaters, one pair of shoes with cardboard lining the soles, and a fear so large it felt like a second backpack she carried everywhere. "You okay?" Nathan asked gently. Vivian looked up too quickly. "Yes, I was just thinking." Marcus offered his most polished smile. Vivian does a great deal of thinking. It's why half the country wants 5 minutes of her time. Nathan didn't take the bait. "Must get lonely." Marcus laughed under his breath. "Lonely? She owns properties in 6 states. Ruby tilted her head, entirely serious. "Buildings don't talk to you when you're sad." Vivian looked at the child, and the truth of that simple sentence landed with more force than any compliment she'd received all year. She set the little paper heart down beside her cup and wrapped both hands around the warm ceramic mug. Not because she was cold anymore, but because she needed something steady to hold on to. The real reason she had come to Birchwood Falls had nothing to do with the gala, or the cameras, or the ribbon cutting scheduled at the new learning center the next morning. Those were the useful reasons, the respectable ones, the kind Marcus could schedule and defend to a board. The real reason was tucked inside a leather folder back in her hotel room, buried under contracts and donor lists. 8 old letters, 9 faded receipts, and 1 black and white photograph clipped from a local newspaper more than 2 decades ago. A girl in thick glasses, standing outside a children's home, smiling shyly beside a nurse, after an eye surgery no one had expected her to receive. Across the bottom of the very first receipt, in blue ink gone soft with age, were 2 initials, NC, no last name, no forwarding address that still existed, just monthly payments, sometimes small, sometimes strangely precise, as though the donor had sent along whatever was left over after rent, groceries, and everything else life demanded. The letters had come folded inside the envelopes with the money, not long letters, not sentimental ones, just enough words to keep a frightened girl from giving up entirely. "You are not alone. Keep reading. The world is going to need what you see." Vivian had built an empire in education technology, but long before the investors, before the awards, before rooms full of strangers stood up when she walked in, she had those letters. They had followed her through foster placements, through community college on borrowed time, through late-night jobs and the first company she ever built out of a rented room with bad heating and second-hand chairs. She had hired investigators, quietly, years ago. She had searched church records and old scholarship files. She had traced a defunct fund through a fire, a merger, a forgotten storage unit, and finally to a handwritten ledger that mentioned, almost in passing, a town called Birchwood Falls. Now she sat in the last booth of a small diner, watching a tired single father dab a drop of syrup from his daughter's sleeve with the corner of a paper napkin. His name was Nathan Cole, NC. The initials brushed against her mind like a struck match near paper, and she pushed the thought away almost as fast, because it felt too impossible, too humble, too close. The man she'd always pictured had been older, richer, maybe a retired doctor, or a quiet attorney with money to spare. Not this man, with his worn cuffs and gentle eyes, still making his own dinner smaller so everyone else at the table would have enough. "What brought you into town?" Nathan asked. Vivian opened her mouth, and for the first time in years, the practiced answer didn't come. She looked at Ruby's paper heart, then out at the storm beyond the glass. "I'm looking for someone," she said quietly. Nathan nodded. "Someone lost." "No," she said, her voice softening. "Someone who found me first." The words sat between them like a candle flame nobody wanted to disturb. Nathan looked at her with a stillness that didn't pry. He'd learned a long time ago that people carry locked rooms inside themselves, and love was never about kicking a door open. Love was about waiting on the porch with a warm plate, for as long as it took. "Then I hope you find them," he said. Marcus checked his watch and leaned in. "Vivian, the mayor's already at the venue. The press pool has been holding for 20 minutes. We cannot build a national education campaign around you eating diner pancakes with strangers." Ruby frowned at him. "We're not strangers anymore." Marcus offered her the particular smile adults use when they want a child to feel small. "That's sweet, honey. But Miss Cross has responsibilities." Nathan's eyes lifted, calm but noticeably firmer. "Her name's Vivian at this table." For the first time all evening, Marcus had no quick reply ready. Vivian asked Ruby about the sketchbook sitting beside the plate, and Ruby brightened instantly, flipping past pages of snowmen and school buses and a brown dog drawn with a pair of crooked wings, until she landed on a page Vivian wasn't ready for. It showed a grand ballroom filled with people in fine clothes, every chair occupied except one. At the edge of the room stood a woman in a long coat, her face turned away, her hands folded in front of her, as though she'd forgotten how to ask anyone for anything. Across the top, in uneven pencil, Ruby had written, "The lady with no table." "Why did you draw her?" Vivian asked, barely above a whisper. Ruby shrugged, suddenly shy. "I saw you on TV last week. Everybody was clapping, but you looked like nobody was actually sitting with you." Marcus shifted, visibly uncomfortable. "That's a very imaginative interpretation." Nathan didn't look at him. He looked at Vivian instead. Kids notice what adults edit out. The sentence reached her gently enough that it hurt. She had spent years being admired in crowded rooms, and not one investor, politician, or reporter had ever noticed the empty chair beside her. A child in a diner booth had seen it through a television screen. Then Marcus's carefulness cracked. He stepped beside the booth, one hand resting lightly on the back of Vivian's chair. "Enough," he said, still smiling for the two photographers now gathering outside beneath the awning. "This has been a touching little pause, but we're done here." "I decide when I'm done," Vivian said. "No," Marcus said, dropping his voice. "The foundation decides. The board decides. The donors waiting at the hotel decide. You are the face of a national campaign, not a woman collecting sad stories in a snowstorm." Nathan folded his napkin and set it beside the empty plate. "You can speak to me however you like," he said evenly, "but you don't get to speak over her." Marcus turned on him fully, the politeness thinning fast. "And who exactly are you?" "Her father," Nathan said, nodding toward Ruby. "That's the only title I need tonight," Marcus laughed once, sharp and short. "A noble single father, a worn jacket, a cute kid with a sketchbook. Forgive me if I've seen this particular script before." He glanced toward Ruby. "Men like this know exactly how to sit close to sympathy. Offer a plate of pancakes, say something humble, and a week later there's a fundraiser, a medical bill, a quiet request for help." Ruby's face flushed red. "My dad doesn't ask people for money." "Sweetheart," Marcus said, "adults are complicated." Nathan's hand moved gently over Ruby's small fist before her anger could teach her the wrong lesson. "Let it go," he murmured. "But he's lying." "I know. Everyone has a hard story," Nathan said, loud enough now for Marcus and the rest of the diner to hear. "Not everyone uses it to buy kindness, and not everyone who looks poor is trying to sell you their pain." The room went very quiet. Dolores stood frozen behind the counter, coffee pot in hand. Then the diner door opened again, and the two photographers stepped inside, shaking snow off their coats. "Miss Cross, is this part of tonight's event?" Marcus recovered his smile instantly. "Just a brief community moment, nothing official." But Ruby slipped out of the booth before her father could stop her. She stood beside him, small in her mismatched mittens, eyes bright with tears she refused to let fall. "It's official to me," she said. "He feeds people when nobody's taking pictures." A camera flashed, white and sudden. Nathan closed his eyes for half a second, not from fear, but from the old exhaustion of only being seen when somebody needed a story out of him. Vivian stood, Ruby's drawing pressed against her coat, and turned toward the photographers with a calm that could quiet a boardroom. "No more pictures." Marcus's smile tightened. "That's not wise." It wasn't a request. Ruby wiped her cheek with the back of one mitten and looked at her father with a fierce little sadness. "They always think you want something," she whispered. Nathan crouched beside her. "People think what they know how to think. They don't know you." "That's all right." "No, it isn't." Before he could stop her, she pulled away and ran toward the narrow hallway near the restrooms, boots thudding up the back staircase that led to their apartment above the laundromat. "She's going for the box," Dolores murmured, setting the coffee pot down. Nathan's color drained. "Evelyn, Dolores, no." A minute passed, then another. The old clock above the counter ticked. A plow rumbled somewhere down Main Street. Then Ruby came back down the hallway, carrying a dented blue tin box painted with faded daisies, holding it with both arms as though it weighed far more than it possibly could. She set it on the table. The metal made a small, hollow sound against the worn wood. Inside were folded receipts, old envelopes, church bulletins, and a stack of letters wrapped in a ribbon gone soft with age. On top sat a photograph clipped from a newspaper, yellowed at the edges, a thin 12-year-old girl in thick glasses, standing outside a children's home after surgery, smiling like hope was something she'd just been handed and didn't quite trust yet. Vivian's breath caught. She knew that photograph. It was hers. "Sophie, Ruby, put it away," Nathan said softly. "No," Ruby said, crying now. "He said you wanted money. He said you were pretending. You don't pretend." Vivian picked up one of the letters with shaking hands. The ink had faded, but the handwriting moved through her like a song, remembered in a dark room. "You are not alone. Keep reading. The world is going to need what you see." At the bottom, NC. She opened one of the receipts. The donor line read Nathan Cole. The amount was $27.43. The date was from the winter she'd nearly dropped out of school because she couldn't afford new lenses. "It was you," she whispered. Nathan looked away, not ashamed of having given, but humbled at being found. "It was never supposed to be about me." 27 minutes later, the ballroom at the Cross Learning Initiative Gala glowed with chandeliers, white tablecloths, and the quiet music of a string quartet. Outside, the snow kept falling over Birchwood Falls. Inside, everything was warm and polished and expensive. A banner behind the podium read, "Every child deserves a future." Marcus had built the whole evening around a clean, simple narrative. Visionary billionaire returns to rural America to expand access to education. Inspiring, useful, safe. Then Vivian walked in with Nathan and Ruby at her side, and the room lost its script entirely. Vivian stepped up to the podium, looked at the prepared remarks glowing on the tablet in front of her, and turned it face down. "When I was 12 years old," she began, "I could barely see the words on a classroom board." The room went still. "I lived in a children's home with a roof that leaked every March. I had no family with savings, no name that opened doors, and no particular reason to believe the world was waiting for me. Then someone I'd never met started sending money. Not much by the standards of this room. $12, $40. Once, $27.43. But those gifts paid for glasses, for books, for bus fare, for one surgery that changed the way I saw the world, in every sense of that phrase." She held up the old letter. With every gift came a note. "You are not alone. Keep reading. The world is going to need what you see." For 22 years, I looked for the person who wrote those words. She turned toward the back of the room, where Nathan stood trying to disappear beside a velvet curtain. "Tonight, I found him. His name is Nathan Cole. He is not a symbol for our campaign. He is the reason I am standing here at all." The applause, when it finally came, arrived slowly and a little unevenly. Not for wealth, not for branding, but for the quiet dignity of a man who had changed a life from the shadows and never once asked the world to turn on a light for him. 3 months later, the old brick schoolhouse on Elm Street reopened as the Cole Family Learning Center, named not to glorify Nathan, but to honor the light his family had kept quietly passing on, one envelope at a time. It offered tutoring, free eye exams, winter coats, after-school meals, and quiet rooms where children could read without being rushed or judged. Nathan never moved into the larger house Vivian offered to buy him. "A bigger house doesn't make a man bigger," he told a reporter. "But a bigger table can feed more people." Vivian didn't try to rescue him from the life he'd built. She respected it, funded the center, protected his privacy, and kept showing up at Halloway's every Thursday evening, always in the last booth, always asking Ruby what she'd drawn that week. Years later, visitors to the Cole Family Learning Center would pause at a small framed note near the entrance, written in Nathan's careful hand. "Some people don't change the world by standing above it. They change it by saving one seat." Underneath, in Ruby's handwriting, 3 smaller words: "Sit with us," because dignity never needs to shout. And kindness, given quietly enough, has a way of traveling through the dark for years, through strangers, through storms, until one day it comes back around and pulls out a chair. If this story stayed with you, tell us in the comments what kindness you still remember, or who once saved a seat for you when you needed it most. Thanks for reading all the way to the end.